Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning is Chagigah daf Yud Chet. This week's learning is sponsored by the Futornik family in honor of Michelle and Bill's anniversary. As Rat Hashem, we will begin our celebration on the plane ride back from Israel on March 1st. Mazal Tov. Okay, a few quick announcements. If you are taking the skills course, then tonight's the last class. So it's been a great course. And if you haven't yet taken it or you haven't caught up on all the lessons, will sit there forever. You can always take the course. It's a great skills class. It will help you, number one, build your Gemara skills. And number two, learn some fascinating sugiyot about Tikkun Olam and how the interplay between rabbinic and rabbinic takanot versus the Oraita Torah law. It's very interesting. And actually, we're going to talk about rabbinic and Torah law today. So there's good connection there. Secondly, the Siyum. There's Is Hashem next week on Tuesday. Okay, on Monday, we're going to have Siyumim in Israel and the Hebrew Siyum on Zoom, which will be coordinated all at the same time so that people can come on the Zoom for the Hadran together with your group and then continue a learning session wherever you are. We're going to have Siyumim in a bunch of places. Stay tuned for details. They'll go up later this week. And that will be at around 8:15 and Israel time. And on Monday night in Israel and wherever you are, whatever time it is by you, it'll be 8:30 on Zoom. We have a great lineup. The details again will come out in the next few days. Okay. Starting from the top of Yud-Chet Amud Aleph on the second line. Okay, so I don't know what you're asking, Monday or Tuesday, but again, the Siyumim in Israel are on Monday in Hebrew, and the Siyum on Tuesday will be in English. Okay, try to split one day, right? Really, the last day to learn is Tuesday. So those in Israel finish Monday's daf, and then we'll do Tuesday's daf together. And Tuesday, right, the English, we'll do the Tuesday daf. And sorry, I said that wrong, if I said it wrong. Anyway, and what else did I want to add about it? And there'll be no regular Zoom class Tuesday morning as usual with the Siyum. And Wednesday, Bezrat Hashem, we start Masechet Yevamot. Okay. Starting at the top, line 2 of the daf, Rish Lakish Amar. We're in the middle of a sugya about, if you remember, Shavuot. Shavuot has only one day. So what do you do about all the korbanot if you didn't get to do them on that one day? Right? And all the other holidays, we have a makeup of 7. We have 7 extra days or 6 extra days. What about Shavuot? So now we had 2 explanations as to how we know. What's obvious to everyone is that there's rules of tashlumim, meaning you can make up. If you didn't bring your korban on Shavuot, you have the next 6 days to make it up, right? Altogether, 7 days to bring the sacrifice, Shavuot, in the next 6 days. Where do we get it from? We saw 2 different opinions. And then in the end of yesterday's daf, we basically brought them together and said, well, we need both. Now we're going to have Rish Lakish say something kind of similar to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but a little bit different. He's going to give a third explanation, and Rabbi Yochanan's going to knock out his answer. B'chag hakatzir, okay, was one of the things you learn as a little kid in school. What are other names for Chag Shavuot? One of them is Chag hakatzir. Okay, when they would cut, right, harvest, they would cut the crops in the fields. So now they say, Ezehu Chag Shata Chogeg B'Kotzer Bo. It says it's the Chag HaKatzir. So now they say, wait a minute, what kind of Chag are you allowed to be Kotzer? It's kind of like the Uksartem that we had in the last one. So what is a Chag that you're allowed to be Kotzer? Heve Omer Zo Atsarit. How could that be Atsarit, which is Shavuot? Emat, when is that? If you say it's on Yantif, well, obviously you can't be kotzil, you can't cut the crops on Yantif. Elalav l'tashlumin, right? And there is nothing else besides Yantif for Shavuot, so it must be talking about tashlumin. To which Rabbi Yochanan says, that's not a good proof. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Chag Asif. What about, it's the holiday where we collect everything, right? This is in Sukkot. Now, what you're going to say, Chag Asif ezu Chag sheyesh bo asifa, Have Omer ze Chag Sukkot emat. Ilema biyom tov melacha biyom tov misharei. You can't possibly do that on Yantif, and not only can you not do it on Yantif, but Ela b'cholosh hamoed, can't even do it on Chol Hamoed. If you're going to say Chag Asif is the holiday where you gather the crops, you can't gather on Yantif, and you can't gather on Chol Hamoed. And there's no tashlumin on Sukkot beyond the holiday. So you're not allowed either to do it then. So now they say, now we're going to go back to the way we always understood Chag HaKatzir and Chag Asif, that it describes the time of year, that this is the time of year when they're cutting the crops in the fields or they're harvesting the crops in Sukkot. So It describes the time of year, not an action that's actionable on that holiday, which would then teach us that maybe Shavuot has some extra days that are attached to it that aren't really holidays. You can do work. And what is that? Tashlumin? No, it really can't come to teach you that, because then you would say the same thing for Chag Asif, and that doesn't work by Sukkot because there is no such thing. So therefore, he rejects Rish Lakish. But since we already mentioned this, which is the way that Gemara likes to work, they're going to say, well, there is something that comes out of this discussion of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish that they both seem to agree to. Now, how do we know Rish Lakish agrees? Just because he doesn't argue with Rabbi Yochanan about this. Michlal, from here you can infer, both of them hold that Chol HaMoed is forbidden to work. Okay, now this brings us back to Moed Katan, which is, we dealt with all of the avoda on Chol HaMoed, right? So now they say, so from here you learn that Melacha is forbidden on Chol HaMoed, and both of them agree to it. So now the Gemara wants to know, Menan Emile, where do we get this from? How do we know? Now we already know because we learned this in Moed Katan, but we're going to do this again. So how do we know the Chol HaMoed you can't work? Okay, remember, we learned about what kind of not work, right? It's not the same kind of not working as Yantif, but there is an asur b'asiyat melacha menan emile. Where do we get it from? Ditanu Rabbanan, as the rabbi said, meaning we're quoting a Braita. We're going to have two opinions in this Braita, then later we're going to see more opinions. Et Chag HaMatzot tishmor shivat yamin. You're supposed to keep Chag HaMatzot tishmor, usually means to observe, which usually means no malacha, for 7 days. He says, there you have it. Tishmor, you have to observe it, which means don't do work all 7 days. Rabbi Yonatan Omer no tzarich. He says you don't even need that verse. Why? It's obvious. Kal v'chomer. You can learn it from a kal v'chomer. How so? Ma rishon u'shvi'i she'en kedusha lifnehem u'la'acharehem asur b'asiyat melacha. Chol hamoed she'esh kedusha lifnehem u'la'acharehem eino din she'asur b'asiyat melacha. Says the following: the first and the seventh day are not surrounded by sanctified days, because the day before the first is not a holiday, and the day after the seventh is not a holiday, and yet they're forbidden to do work on them. Let's take now the intermediary days. The intermediary days are surrounded by a holy day before, a holy day after, the first day and the seventh day. So obviously then they're going to, if they're surrounded by holy days, then it must be that it's forbidden to do malacha as well, okay? Because they obviously have something that's more than the first day and the last day. And if the first day and the last day are already forbidden to do malacha, must be on those days as well. To which the Gemara is going to raise a question on this, okay? And say, not necessarily. Okay, so they say, Ma l'sheshet yemei breshit she'en behem korban musaf, tomar b'cholosh hamoed she'esh bo korban musaf. What do you mean? The 6 days of the week are surrounded by Shabbat before, Shabbat after, and yet we don't say you can't do malacha every day of the week, right? Oh, sorry, I totally skipped. Sheshet yemei breshit yochichu. Sorry, I went to the response to that. Okay, let's go back. Sheshet yemei breshit yochichu. The 6 days of breshit will prove it. They have sanctity before and after, Shabbat before, Shabbat after, and yet they're permitted to do work. So now comes the rejection. By accident, I read the rejection earlier. But 6 days of creation are not the same as the 5 intermediary days of the holiday. Why? Because the 6 days of creation have nothing unique like a korban musaf that you bring. So obviously, we're not going to say, oh, these are severe days that you need to not work. First of all, it would obviously become ridiculous. You'd never, ever be able to work. Forgetting about that. But Tomar b'cholosh hamoed she'esh bo korban musaf. Chol HaMoed has 2 things going for it. Number 1, it has sanctity before and sanctity after. And number 2, you have to bring a korban musaf. To which the Gemara says, well, Rosh Chodesh yuchya she'esh bo korban musaf u'mutar b'asiyat melacha. But Rosh Chodesh will prove that korban musaf has nothing to do with, right? Nothing to do with not doing work, because korban musaf and not doing work have no correlation at all. Because look at Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh has a korban musaf, and yet you can do work. Okay, now you might say there is some sort of isur melacha on Rosh Chodesh as well. And Tosfot raises that point. We saw it in Megillah where they talked about how many aliyot, and because of bitul melacha, you can add because people aren't working. There's a whole, right? Tosfot actually deals with this a lot because Tosfot likes to deal with contradictory sugyot. And Tosfot basically says, well, the isur melacha on Rosh Chodesh is just a minhag. He first suggests this at the bottom, second to last Tosfot on the daf. He says it's only rak mishum minhag, only a custom. It's not the same thing. Then he also suggests further on that maybe it's women only who have a custom not to do malacha on Rosh Chodesh and not everybody. So there's a whole different way of dealing with this. Okay, but let's just assume it doesn't have the same forbidden malacha as by Chol HaMoed. So Rosh Chodesh proves that the connection to Musaf and Isur Malacha is not a good connection. Okay, in which case we're back to, we don't understand how you get to the fact from this Kal V'chomer that Chol HaMoed is going to be forbidden B'asiyat Malacha. So now they say, no, that doesn't prove anything, Rosh Chodesh, because Rosh Chodesh she'ein karoi mikra kodesh, tomar b'cholosh hamoed shekaroi mikra kodesh, and ho'il v'karoi mikra kodesh, dinu she'asur b'asiyat malacha. We're now going to return back to Rabbi Yonatan's argument and say basically, if we take the whole picture, we have, first of all, it's Kedusha before and after. It also has Musaf, and it's called mikra kodesh. Because it's called mikra kodesh, that gives it the strength that we could say, yes, it is asur b'asiyat malacha, and we can learn it from a Kal V'chomer. Okay, so we had two answers. Either it says tishmor shivat yamim, which seems to indicate isur malacha, or Kal V'chomer because it has kedusha before and after, and all the additional korban musaf and mikra kodesh. Tanya idach, another brayta, which is going to bring a different proof. Okay, two more proofs. Kol melecha, in the end, we're going to have 5 proofs. Kol melecha d'avodah lo ta'asu, don't do any work, and that's just talking generally about the holiday. Okay, it's b'yom harishon mikra kodesh kol melechad avodah lo ta'asu, and then it says shivat yamim takrivu ishel Hashem b'yom hashmini mikra kodesh. Okay, so it basically talks about all the days of the holiday, and it says kol melechad avodah lo ta'asu limena cholosh hamoed shasur b'asiyat malacha. Okay, there was no reason to say that again. It already said it in other places. It must be asur b'asiyat malacha. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Next, Rabbi Akiva Omer Is Atsarit. Again, he responds by saying, I don't need your verse. It says, these are the holidays. This is the intro verse. These are the holidays, and then it starts to list them, including Chol HaMoed. What's this Moadei Hashem? Im berishon harei kvar nemar Shabbaton. Im b'shvi'i harei kvar nemar Shabbaton. You're talking about the first day. You're talking about the last day. It already says it explicitly. This Eila Moadei Hashem must be adding something additional. It must be, it's referring specifically to Chol HaMoed. So this additional pasuk in the beginning to say these are all the Moadim, the holidays, must be to tell you what's a holiday. If not, it's forbidden with malacha. Okay, that's proof number 4. Proof number 5, Tanya idach, another bright. Sheshet yamim tochal matzot, uvayom shvi'i atzarit la'Hashem. We actually learned this pasuk in Pesachim. We darshan it in a bunch of different ways. It's a very strange verse because it says 6 days you should eat matzah. What happened to 7 days, right? It's a 7-day holiday. Okay, so 6 days you eat matzah. And on the 7th day, it will be a holiday. Now, it's also weird because it doesn't mention the first day, right? It's a little bit strange in general. This pasuk, there's a lot of issues. So this drasha, it's going to hone in, you'll see. They're basically going to say there's a comparison between 6 days and the 7th day, okay, which really means not really 6, it's really 5, because they want to say there's a comparison between the 5 intermediary days, basically the days preceding the 7th day and the 7th day. Mashvi'i atzul, what is Atsarit? If not, there's actually 2 different interpretations of Atsarit, but here they're going with the interpretation. Atsarit means stop, right? From lashon la'atzul, to stop doing malacha. So mashvi'i atzul, af shesh yamim atzulin, just like the 7th day is you have to stop. Also, the 6 days before you have to stop, right? Just like on the 7th day. Well, if you're going to compare the previous 6 days to the 7th day, then you're going to say, well, the 7th day, you can't do any malacha, right? It's like a Shabbat or basically a Chag. I mean, you can do ochal nefesh, but it's like a holiday type of malacha. So maybe Chol HaMoed will be the same, and we know it's not. So how do we get to the fact that, right, we learned, that was all Moed Katan, where we learned about what type of malacha is forbidden on Chol HaMoed. So you might have thought it would be everything. So now they say, Talmud Lomar, Ubayom HaShvi'i Atzarit. But the pasuk specifically sets the 7th day different from all the other days. So on the one hand, it's the same because they're compared in the verse. On the other hand, it's different because it's set aside as if just that day is Atzarit. Therefore, what do they learn from here? Hashvi'i atzul b'chol malacha. The 7th day is forbidden from all work. Ve'ein shisha yamim atzulim b'chol malacha. But the other 6 days are not forbidden from all malacha, just some malacha. Now, what's the problem? The Torah doesn't really specify which ones yes, which ones no. So here comes again this theme we're going to see, which is the importance of the rabbis and how much power the rabbis have. Here we see the Torah gave permission to the Chachamim to interpret, right? This connects with the whole end of our Mishnah. If you remember, our Mishnah talked about when you push off Yom HaTavoach, the day of the Korban, to Sunday, if let's say the holiday was on Shabbat, you push it off to Sunday. In that case, you have to change a little bit and do things that you would normally do in order to show that it's not a holiday, to Lehotzim Liban Shel Tzdukim, right, who didn't believe in the oral Torah. This is, again, this idea that they're trying to stress the importance of our oral tradition against the Tzdukim, who didn't believe in the same oral tradition. Look how much power is given to the rabbis. Lomar lecha eze yom asur ve'eze yom mutar. They're the ones who determine what day a holiday is going to fall on, right? As opposed to Shabbat, which comes every 7 days. The holiday is determined by Rosh Chodesh, and Rosh Chodesh is determined by the rabbis. This is to review this whole daf of, number one, Moed Katan, and number two, Masechet Rosh Hashanah, where we talked about Kiddush HaChodesh and the power given to the rabbis. So that's the first thing. And not only that, but they're also given the power to determine Ezo Melacha Asura ve'ezo Melacha Muteret. They get to determine which of the forbidden malachot on Chol HaMoed, right? They're the ones who defined, okay, what kind of malacha is forbidden on Chol HaMoed. So here the Gemara is stressing the power given to the rabbis, right? And the fact that the Torah is an oral Torah, not just a written Torah, but there's a very important part of tradition and a part of our taking part in changing that tradition, okay, in terms of our being able to interpret. So that's the rabbis' part in continuing the tradition and defining it. Now getting back to, so that was our 5 interpretations of how we know whenever there's many different proofs, it shows that it's an issue that is a debatable issue. And it's obviously complicated. It's not so clear cut. It was Isser Malacha on Chol HaMoed. I mean, obviously it was obvious to all of them, but each one had to get it from a different source. That already shows when there's 5 interpretations that it wasn't so clear cut. Now we go back to the Mishnah and this line that I just mentioned, which is we have to, when Yom HaTavoach, the day that you do the Tashlumin, comes out on Sunday, we're worried about the Tzdukim. The Tzdukim said, Me'malchorat HaShabbat is when you bring the Korban HaOmer, the day after Shabbat, which we understand is the day after the holiday of Pesach, the first day, but they understood it as always going to be on a Sunday. Whatever Sunday comes after Pesach and then count 7 weeks, that's going to be your Shavuot holiday. It's always going to come out on a Sunday. So if you push off the sacrifice to a Sunday, because Shabbat was the holiday and you couldn't bring the holiday sacrifices on Sunday, or if you're Beit Shammai and you hold even on Friday, you can't. So anytime it came out on Friday or Shabbat, you push it off to Sunday, you had to do certain things different. And one of them was, or 2 of them, mutarim behesped v'ta'anit. You're allowed to do eulogies and you're allowed to fast if you want, even though you normally can't do that on a day where you're bringing holiday sacrifices. So the people don't think that the Tzdukim are right and that this is actually a full-blown holiday. So Vaha Itmar, it really should be Vahatanya. Okay, it's a mistake here in the text. It should say, doesn't it say in a Braita? We're going to bring a contradictory Braita. Maaseh umet Alexa below. There was a person named Alexa, a man named Alexa who died in Lod. V'nichnesu kol Yisrael l'safto, and everybody came out to eulogize him. Below hinicham Rabbi Tarfon mipnei sheyom tov shel Atsarit haya. And Rabbi Tarfon said, stop, no eulogizing him. It's a holiday of Atsarit. Now the Gemara says, wait, this doesn't make any sense. Yom Tov Sakadatach, you think it was really Yontif? No way. Ibi Yom Tov Mika'atu, there's no way that everyone's going to come on Yontif to the temple, to eulogize someone. There's no way that people would think you can eulogize on Yontif. No chance. So therefore, Ela Ema, Shmip Neshe Yom Tivach. It must be, it was the Yom Tivach, it was the day people were bringing the sacrifices for Shavuot, the ones who didn't make it on Shavuot. And that's why they thought it was okay to eulogize. Came Rabbi Tarfon and said, no eulogizing. So now what do you see? You can't eulogize. And our Mishnah said, you specifically can eulogize. So very easy. Answer, lo kasha kam b'yom tov shechaliot achal haShabbat, kam b'yom tov shechaliot b'Shabbat. If the holiday, let's start with the last one. If the holiday comes out on Shabbat, that's exactly the case we were talking about. Then you push it off to Sunday and you do the sacrifices on Sunday. And then, right, everyone's doing the sacrifices on Sunday. And then you, on that day, you're going to basically, or not everyone, but whoever can on that day, you're going to end up saying, that's our Mishnah, do hespedim, right? You can eulogize people because otherwise they'll think that Tzdukim are correct. But if Yom Tov's Chaliyot Achar Shabbat, let's say Yom Tov was on Sunday, and people are making it up on Monday, and that's what we're talking about. Or Yom Tov was on Tuesday, and people are making it up on Wednesday, or any other day of the week where it doesn't come out the first day after the holiday, right? Where you're doing the bulk of the people are doing Tashlumin is Sunday. But if it's any other day of the week, then there's no concern about the Tzdukim. The Tzdukim didn't like the holiday was on Wednesday. So at that point, we don't have to worry about eulogizing. And that's right. So now again, when Rabbi Tarfon said you can't eulogize, he was talking about all those other days because he's saying sorry, I hope I didn't say it right. I think I might have said it wrong. Those days you can't, you are not allowed to eulogize because they have a certain simcha, happiness to them because you're doing a sacrifice. And since there's no issue of the tzdukim, that's fine. We treat it not exactly like a holiday, but holiday-like in certain ways. And we're not worried everyone's going to think, oh, today's Shavuot. It's only when it comes out on Sunday that we're worried about that. Okay, turning now to Amud Bet, take a deep breath, everyone. We are now starting the whole last part of Masechah Chagigah, which is all about Tum'ah and Tahara, okay, laws of purity and impurity. So now, the first question before we even get into them is, what's this doing here? Okay, so I'll give you a few possible answers. One is Rashi, in Dibur Matchil, kind of about 15 lines down from the top of the page, in Nitzmah Haguf, 3 lines into that Rashi says, Hi dinakalu hacha, the reason why it's said here, Gabei hilchot haregel, in the middle of holidays of the regel, lefi sheyesh besofan, because at the end of this section, it's not exactly the end, but in the middle of these mishnayot, we're going to see, there's hilchot haregel, there's things that are specific to the holiday. So because of that, this was a unit of mishnayot that kind of were, we always talk about that there's units of mishnayot that went together, especially because they would recite them by heart and remember them before they actually put it together as a book. And in the middle of that, there's something that deals with the regel. That's why they brought it here. That's Rashi. It's a very specific kind of answer. The Meiri makes it much more general. He says, in general, on the holidays, people had to come to be pure on the holiday because they were going to bring their sacrifices. So because of that, they deal with all sorts of laws of Tumah and Tara so that people would know because of the holiday. Okay, another interesting reason is we're going to see that this Mishnah is going to be talking about Tumah and Tara on a rabbinic level. And I think possibly another connection is that we keep seeing in these Mishnayot the strength of the rabbis and the talk about against the tzdukim and all about the rabbinic tradition is super important. And they want to highlight that in these dapim. So also this fits in with that because they're specifically talking about rabbinic laws of Tumah and Tara for the most part. Okay, not all of them, but for the most part. So let's give some background. Okay, the background, I'm going to give some very general background about Tumah and Tara laws, which is there's levels of Tumah and Tara. Today we're going to see levels of other things within those laws, but there's levels in terms of some things, let's say, avi avota tumah, that's a dead body. Okay, a dead body comes in contact with something, it becomes an avatuma. Every time something comes in contact with something else, it's one level below. Okay, these are degrees of tumah, of impurity. So if I touch a dead body, I become an avatuma. An avatuma can be mitameh, right? Each level can be mitameh certain things and not necessarily other things. So an avatuma, and also avi avoda tumah, can be mitameh people, kelim, okay, Adam and kelim usually go together, people and vessels, and food and drink, okay? Anything that comes in contact with an avatuma, touches, things like that, becomes a rishon. A rishon can only pass on tuma now, so it could be a person, it could be kelim, it could be food, okay, drink, or a rishon can only pass on tuma, now I'm talking on a Torah level only, can only pass on tuma to food and drink. So food and drink becomes a sheni. So the only thing that can be a sheni is food and drink, basically. Once it gets to a sheni, if we're talking about something that's not sanctified, that's the end of it, okay? There's no, tuma can't go anywhere beyond that. But if you're talking about truma, then you can get to a shlishi. And if you're talking about meaning, if the food that's a sheni touches truma, since truma is sanctified, it can become a shlishi l'tuma. Now, generally, we say that a sheni is posel l'truma, which is important language. We're going to see it later today. It disqualifies truma because why? That's the end stage of truma. Truma doesn't go past a shlishi. So instead of saying it's mitameh truma, we don't say that because mitameh would give this impression that it causes it to be impure and it could pass on impurity, but it can't because that's the end because there is nothing beyond shlishi. But if it's kodshim, if it's sacrificial meat, for example, let's say you have meat that became impure from a sheni, so it's a shlishi, that can pass on tuma to a revi'i. Let's say it touches other sacrificial meat, that other sacrificial meat will be tameh as well. So when it comes to kodshim, which is a higher level of sanctity than truma, and truma has a higher level of sanctity than chulin, which actually doesn't have any sanctity to it, but it's going to basically pass on impurity to a shlishi for truma, a revi for kodshim. Okay, that's kodesh. Now, the other thing you need to know is that if you come in contact, so we talked right now, you came in contact with something, you became tameh. If just your hands touched it, your whole body becomes tameh. It's not like you could say just my hands touched it. No, your body is your body. Someone comes in contact with something, they're tameh. So if I came in contact with a sheretz, there was a rishon, it fell on my hand. I'm sorry, there was an avatuma, I become a rishon, my whole body. However, the rabbis came along and said, and likewise, if I touched a rishon, not likewise, if I touch a rishon, nothing happens to me because a rishon only passes on impurity to food and drink, and I'm not food and drink. So if I come in contact with something that's a rishon, nothing happens to me. However, the rabbis said, we're going to add a level of tumah here. If my hands touch something that's a rishon, my hands, okay, not my whole body. Remember I said before, if your hands touch, your whole body becomes tameh? No, the rabbinic law is if my hands touch a rishon, my hands become impure, okay? And now my hands carry on impurity. Just my hands, not my body, okay? So this is why, okay, we're going to eventually get today to why we wash hands, netilat yadayim, before we eat bread, okay, which is a very big question and it's a bit confusing. If you don't understand all this background, it actually becomes very confusing, but we'll get to that later at the end of today's stuff. So if my hands touch something, that's a rishon, the rabbis say my hands are a sheni. Now, what does that mean, my hands are a sheni? So it means I can touch food and drink, which becomes a shlishi. Now, if it's chulin, it's irrelevant because chulin doesn't have shlishi. Only if it's truma is it going to be a problem, okay? Or kodshim, sacrifices, because there's only shlishi and revi for truma and sacrifices. So therefore, if my hands touch truma or sacrifices, it's going to be a problem. Now, the other thing you need to know is that there were people called the Prushim, which we've talked about a lot, which were basically the rabbis and their chevra, and they took Truma and Tara very seriously. And even though they weren't kohanim that were eating Truma, they often ate their chulin as if they were Truma. There were even people who ate their chulin as if, right, which is their non-sacred anything. They treated it as if it was either Truma or even kodshim. And then they kind of took these levels even farther. Okay, that's also important to know. So let's start our Mishnah. Notzlim liyadayim. Okay, so now the question is, if your hands become tameh, and only your hands, not your body. If your body's tameh, right? If your hands become tameh and it's doraita and your body became tameh, you have to go to the mikveh. And if it was from a dead body, you have to wait the 7 days and you need the parajuma waters and all sorts of other things. But if it's this rabbinic, okay, which either is, I came in contact with a rishon, or, by the way, I forgot to mention another important one that's rabbinic, which we've learned a number of times, which is the kitvei kodesh. They said sacred texts also are mitamei yadayim. And this was for various reasons. One being they wanted people to treat Sifrei Torah with kavod and didn't want them to touch it. So they said, if you touch it, your hands become tamei, and that would prevent people from touching the Sefer Torah directly. Another reason is they were worried it would ruin the Sefer Torah, the parchment, if they touched it all the time. So they told people, oh, it will be mitamei yadayim. And a third reason, if you remember, this is less for Sefer Torah, but for all the other kitvei kodesh, they would put them next. They would put the truma next to it because the truma was sanctified, and the books they treated as sanctified. And then the mice would come and the mice would eat through the books. So they told people, oh no, they're mitamei yadayim, and that way they were worried if you kept. They said, oh, if you kept the truma next to it and then you accidentally touched the truma while you were near the Sefer Kodesh, that would basically incentivize people to keep the truma somewhere else and not keep them near the Sefer Kodesh and not have the mice eat away at them. So there's all sorts of reasons why the rabbis instituted Tumat Yadayim for Kitvei Kodesh. That's why we had a whole question by Esther, is she Matame Yadayim or not, right? Megillat Esther. Do we say the Megillah is or not? And that was a whole debate. Is it a Kitvei Kodesh or not? So anyway, those are all rabbinic Tuma. And in addition, so either the Mishnah is talking about one of those cases, or the Mishnah is talking about all yadayim, we assume are askaniot. Okay, there's this concept that we just assume, since your hands touch all sorts of things and you don't always know if something's tameh or not. It's not like there's a sign on it that says tameh. Like you might go to a kiddush and there'll be dairy, parv, so but people don't generally put a little sign that says tameh. So because of that, you might have touched something that's tameh and have had no idea. So because of that, we also assume that all yadayim are askaniot, and therefore maybe this is just in general, anybody needs to do this. So now the question is, if you want to eat X or Y or Z, or we'll see there's going to be 5 different things, how do you clean your hands for this process? Okay. So again, either it's a case where you definitely came in contact with a rishon or you touched kitvei kodesh, or maybe just yadayim askaniot. There's a debate about what the Mishnah is referring to exactly, but let's just put that point aside. The point is you have to purify your hands for whatever reason. How do you do it? So, the first 3 levels, all you need to do is wash your hands like we do. Okay, wash your hands like we do before we eat bread. For eating chulin, that gets rid of the tumah. For maaser sheni, which is the next level up, maaser sheni, remember, is the produce that you're supposed to bring on years 1, 2, 4, and 5 to Jerusalem. Not maaser that you give to a Levi, that doesn't have sanctity to it, and not the maaser ani that you give to the poor people, no sanctity. Only the one that has to be in Jerusalem has sanctity to it. So that you'd have to also nutlim yadayim. And for truma, which we know has sanctity to it, all those 3 things, you just wash your hands. Likodesh, if it's sacrificial meat, matzbilin. You have to put your hands into a mikveh. You can't just take water, pour over your hands. You have to actually dunk your hands in the mikveh, not your whole body, but your hands. Ulechatat, the highest level, which we didn't discuss yet, is the water that you mix the ashes of the paraduma. If you want to be dealing with the paraduma waters and helping people in the purification process, if you're going to come in contact with that water, we keep it on a very high level of purity, that whole thing. And you're going to have to, if your hands became impure for any reason, you're going to have to tovel your entire body. Okay, there's no rabbinic, only your hands touch the rishon. So you don't have to worry because rishon doesn't really get your whole body. In this case, we're super careful, and we're going to make you dunk your whole body in the mikveh. So therefore, right, so if your hands become impure, your whole body's impure. Taval lechulin, next halacha, okay, and it's going to be the same levels. If you dunked in the mikveh with intention to eat chulin, okay, this could be even netilat yadayim, although it doesn't say, it seems to be talking about a tefillah. Let's say I was impure, like a real impurity, and I went to the mikveh in order to enable me to be pure enough to eat chulin. Okay, now, even though chulin generally you can't eat even with being impure, but you wanted to treat your chulin more seriously. So, taval lechulin, huchsak lechulin asur l'maaseh. Here we're going to learn that your intent when you dunk in the mikveh is important. You have to have intent. I'm dunking to eat the following. If I have intent for something low level, like chulin, then I can't go up a level and eat maaser sheni with it. It's not a good tefillah for the next level up, and obviously for all the other levels. So I can't eat maaser sheni with that. As taval l'maaser, if I dunked for the purposes of eating maaser sheni, huchzak l'maaser asur the truma. So I can eat maaser, and obviously I can eat chulin, but I can't go up a level and eat something more sanctified like truma. And so on and so on. Taval l'truma, uchzak l'truma, asur l'kodesh. Taval l'kodesh, uchzak l'kodesh, asur l'chatat. Okay, so we keep going up a level. And here the Mishnah even says, the general rule, taval l'chamor, mutar l'kal. If I did it for something, like let's say I said, I'm dunking right now to purify myself to be able to deal with the mechatat of the para aduma, the waters that are mixed with the ashes of the red heifer, then I can eat anything, because the more stringent it is, that allows all the more lenient ones. And here they point out, if I just went in the mikveh, let's say I went in the ocean, which could count as a mikveh, but I didn't have any intent to go in the mikveh, like I just went to go swim in the ocean, well, ka'ilu lo taval. Okay, if I had no intention that I was doing this for the purposes of mikveh, it doesn't work. Big day ama aretz, next category. Now we learn about what's called tumat midras. We've seen this a bunch of times before, which is a nida, a yoledet, right? So a woman who's a menstruating woman who becomes impure. Yoledet, a woman who gives birth. A zav and a zava, okay, which we're not going to get into the details of what all that is now. We've seen it before. Anyway, these people have a special tumah called midras. That means anything they sit on or lie on, or that, and anything that could be made for sitting or lying on, they make it impure. And instead of it having the regular rules of a person who's, let's say, an av, they're an avatuma, they're mitame, and the object will be a rishon, In this case, midras, it could be also something they could step on, by the way. Then that's the literal translation of midras. Then it becomes an avatuma also, which means that, let's say it's a cloth. We're going to see in the Gemara, they're talking about big day. Okay. Clothes are midras. Okay. So let's say it's something that you could put underneath you on the couch, let's say, and you'd sit on it. So that if someone sat on it, it becomes tame avatuma. So if someone touches it, they become a rishon. It will be matame people. Normally, it would be amin avatuma. I touched something, it became a rishon, and it can only be matame food and drink. In this case, it ups it a level to an avatuma level. Okay, this is by Torah law. It says it explicitly in the Torah. So now, bigdei ha'aretz. Now, let's say, what's the issue? In my house, I know what goes on in my house, who sits on what. So I'm in charge of figuring out, right? Telling people, oh, this is tamei midras or it's not. Some menstruating woman was in my house when she was tamei, right? You forget about the fact that everyone needed to know when people were menstruating, which is a whole different reality than nowadays because they needed to know all these rules. Okay. So now, if I'm an Ama'aretz, now an Ama'aretz is known as someone who doesn't really care so much about Tum and Tapa. And I say, oh, nobody sat on that was tamei. Well, obviously I'm not going to be so believable. So bigdei ha'aretz midras leprushim. If you're a prushi and you want to keep a certain level of sanctity, and the Amaretz tells you no need to sat on that cloth, we're not going to believe you because I don't know that you're really taking this Amaretz is going to take it so seriously. So we're going to be more careful. And we're going to assume it's tamei. Bigdei prushim midras la'ochle truma. If you have clothing that a prushi who is careful, because a prushi is someone who is careful, they pay attention to things. But guess what? They don't pay attention to things well enough as someone who's a Kohen who's eating truma, because that's much more serious. Okay, maybe I'm extra machmir, I'm careful, I eat my chulin as if they're truma, but it's not the same as if I'm really eating truma. Because first of all, if someone eats truma when they're tamei, they get death in the hands of God. That's quite serious, as opposed to me just, being extra careful. So therefore, if I tell someone, oh, no need to came in contact with it, this cloth just touched you, don't worry about it. You're not a tamei now because nobody sat on it. Well, if you're eating truma, you can't believe me. Bigdei ochle truma midras lekodesh, and likewise, if you're eating truma and you're very careful, but you're not as careful as those who are eating sacrificial meat, so they can't trust you. Bigdei kodesh midras lechatat, and even though you can eat it, right, and not be worried to eat sacrificial meat, you still can't deal with the mechatat because maybe you weren't as careful there. They're super, super careful. You might remember the Mishnah about the kids and how they would have these kids bring the water and they would live in this place that was make sure they never came in contact with tumah, right? We're super careful when it comes to paraduma. Okay, we'll deal with that another time, why and all that. Okay, next. Now we're going to have two examples of people that we're going to see that they actually took this very seriously. Yosefeno Esner, which we learned one of the zug, right? The early zug, the first of the zugot. Haya chasid shebekuna. Okay, he was a Kohen and he kept things very carefully. And yet, but anyone who would eat sacrificial meat and came in contact with a mitpachat from his house, they wouldn't do it. Okay, they would assume it was tamei. Yochanan ben Gudgeda hayalchela tarat hakodesh kol yamav. He came from a family; they were extra careful. Everybody kept chulin as if they were sacrificial meat, not just upping it a level to truma, but as if it was sacrificial meat. And haytam mitpachto midras lechatat. Okay, again, they trusted him for Kodesh level, but they didn't trust him for the higher level of Chatat. Now the Gemara is going to start off with some questions. The first words of the Mishnah were Notlim liadayim lechulin ulamaser. First four words of the Mishnah we're going to deal with right now. You wash your hands for chulin and for maaser sheni. So now they say, you really need to wash your hands to eat chulin and maaser sheni? Urimini, that contradicts the following Mishnah in Bikurim. Bikurim are your first fruits that you bring to the Kohen. They have sanctity like truma, basically. They go to the Kohen, or at least in certain ways. So Urimini says in the Mishnah, Bikurim, Hatruma va Bikurim. We're not going to learn a whole bunch of different laws about them. Only one is going to be relevant to us, about Netilat Yadayim. Chayavim alehem mita b'chomesh v'asur lezarim. Okay, let's start from the end. A non-Kohen is not allowed to eat them. Okay, only Kohanim. And if a non-Kohen eats it, he gets death by the hands of God. And he has to add an extra fifth, which is really a quarter. Okay, he has to pay back the value of what he ate to Kohen and add an extra penalty. V'hei nichse Kohen. When you give bikurim or truma to a Kohen, remember truma is about 1/50th or 1/40th or 1/60th of your produce. You give it to the Kohen or you give your first fruits to the Kohen. it becomes their property 100%, meaning there's no limitations on what they could do with it. The biggest example they always bring is you can betroth a woman with it, right? Because you need something of value and it belongs to him. He can betroth a woman. He can use it for any personal use he wants. If you have a combination, meaning you have an amount of truma that fell into a pile of chulin, and now you don't know which is the truma. It all got mixed up. So normally in laws of nullification, we say 1 in 60. When it comes to truma or bikurim, we say 1 in 101. Okay, you need 101 against. Okay, so you need, let's say, 1 se'ah, let's call it. That's usually the measurement they talk about. Falls into 100 se'ah of chulin. Then what we do is we take out a random se'ah, we sell it to a Kohen for a very low price. We basically say, this is Kohen, this must be for the Kohen. And the rest of it can be chulin, even though there's truma mixed in. But any less than 100 of chulin, it can't be nullified because it's more significant than the average item. Okay, like milk falling into a pot of cholent, okay, which would be canceled in 60, not in 100. U'tu'unim netilat yadayim, that's obviously the important line for us. You need to wash your hands before eating truma or bikurim. V'harev shemesh, if you went to the mikveh, let's say you were impure, you'd have to wait till Seder Kochavim, till the 3 stars come out. This is the first Mishnah in Shas, if you remember from Brachot, Ematai, right? When do you say Shema? Mishasha kohanim nechasim lechol b'trumatan, when they can eat truma, which is basically this. They can eat truma, right? If they toveled in the morning or anytime during the day, they have to wait till the sun sets before they can eat truma. Okay. Now here the Mishnah finishes off and says, and this is the important part, these laws are all relevant for truma and bikurim. Masha'en came b'maser, but they're not relevant for maser, meaning for maser sheni. So now the Gemara says, and kolsh came b'chulin. If they're not relevant for maser sheni, then they're not relevant for chulin. In which case, what do you see here? Tu'unim netilat yadayim is only for bikurim and truma and not for maser and not for chulin. So why did our Mishnah say maser and chulin? So kasha maser maser, kasha chulin chulin. So we have contradiction in the maser, we have contradiction in the chulin. How do we resolve it? So bishlama maser maser lo kasha. Maser is easier to resolve. Why? Ha Rabbi Meir, ha Rabbanan. We're going to see a machlok at Rabbi Meir, Rabbanan about this. We'll just say one holds like Rabbi Meir, one holds like Rabbanan. Very easy. Ditnan. By the way, there's a sheet for today. If you haven't looked at it yet, it'll help you to follow all this. Anything that needs toveling from divrei chachamim on a rabbinic level, meaning, right, like the things we discussed, it's mitame kodesh and posel truma. Basically, that means it's a sheni. It goes one more level for truma and disqualifies it, and it's mitame, sacrificial meat, which can then also theoretically be mitame one more level to a fourth degree. Umutar lechulin ulamaser, divrei Rabbi Meir. But it's permitted for chulin and maser, meaning you don't need to wash your hands for it. That's going to match the Mishnah in bikurim. The chachamim oslim b'maser. The rabbis say, no, it's forbidden for maser, meaning you need to wash your hands for maser as well. So that matches our Mishnah. So when we resolved the maser, we said, our Mishnah is chachamim. This Mishnah in bikurim is Rabbi Meir's opinion. Ela chulin kasha, but we don't have a resolution for chulin. Lo kasha kam ba'achila, kam b'nigia. So we're going to distinguish. This is like they're kind of making up this distinction, but they're saying there must be a difference when you want to eat it versus when you want to touch it. To touch chulin, it's not a problem. It doesn't go. But it does pass on if you're going to eat chulin. For eating chulin, we need to have a higher level. So there you're going to need netilat yadayim, even though it didn't say so. So when it said not for maser, and then they meant not for chulin, or this opinion of the rabbis, forbidden chulin in maser, but not in chulin, we're assuming they mean touching, but not eating. If you're going to eat chulin, yes, you would wash your hands. So Matkef Rav Shimi Barashi says, what are you talking about? Says when the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Meir, he was talking about eating maser. It's forbidden. You need to wash your hands, but not touching maser and not eating chulin, meaning his topic was eating. And yet he said only maser, not chulin. Seems like it's not a problem to eat chulin. So they both must be talking about eating. How are we going to distinguish between the Mishnah Bikurim and our Mishnah? Our Mishnah was talking about eating bread. When you eat bread, and this is where we finally get to it. When you eat bread, you have to wash the tilat yadayim even for chulin. When you eat fruits, you don't have to. How do we know this? It says if you wash your hands for fruits, That's arrogance. That's saying, oh, I'm keeping such a high level of impurity. I'm washing my hands for fruits. When do we do that? We only do it one night a year at the Seder. That's why we wash our hands out when we dip the vegetable into the salt water, because now it's susceptible to impurity. We'll get to that tomorrow, but it got in contact with the liquid and it's a vegetable. We're only doing it once a year on Pesach, but in general, we don't do that. If you do it, it's very arrogant. So now we say, so when it said not maaser, but not, right, and when it said not maaser and not chulin, they were talking about eating fruits. But when they said, yes, you have to, that's eating bread. And now, why bread? So now it doesn't really say this inside, but the commentaries talk about this. Really, the whole thing about eating bread was a takana, so that Kohanim who eat truma are careful with truma. In other words, Kohanim, first of all, why bread? Because Reshit Dagancha, it says by the Kohanim, you have to give the first of your dagan, your grains. Mostly, what did they do with grains? They made bread out of them. So most of the truma was dagan, was bread. Therefore, when it came to truma, since you always have to wash your hands for truma, they said in order to make sure the Kohanim are careful, we're going to make everybody wash their hands, but only for bread, not for everything. Okay, they made this distinction. And they said for bread, we're going to make everyone wash their hands so that the Kohanim don't mess up and don't wash their hands for truma. So it was like this chumrah, okay? But then you say, okay, well, that's only when the temple's around and truma and tara is important. What about when there's no temple? So they kept this so that in case, hopefully the temple will be rebuilt immediately, and we don't want people to forget these laws. So therefore, it's like two jumps. It was really for Kohanim, truma, but we made everybody do it so that the Kohanim wouldn't mess up either. And that's why they did it on bread, to remember the Kohanim. And even when there's no temple, we still do it so that we remember this law. And that's why we wash our hands on a regular basis when we eat bread. Okay, so that's that section. And that's what we're saying, basically. That's the distinction. Is it bread or other things? Other things you don't need to, but bread, yes. And that's because of the special extra thing that they instituted. Last part for today. Tanu Rabbanan until yadav nitkaven yadav to'orot lo nitkaven yadav tmeot. We talked about this issue of kavana. If you wash your hands, only if you have intent. I'm doing it for washing hands and not just water spilled on your hands or something. But if you intended, it works. If you didn't intend, it doesn't work. V'chein hamadbil yadav. Likewise, if you put them in a mikvah for the things that you need to put them in a mikvah, like for sacrificial meat. Nitkaven yadav torah, lo nitkaven yadav tmeot. So now they say, but isn't there a braita? V'hatanya, bein nitkaven, bein lo nitkaven yadav torah. It says it doesn't matter whether you have intent or not. Amrav Nachman lo kasha kan lechulin kan lemaser. Now we say, if your hands just happen to get wet, you didn't intend, and you want to eat chulin and you want to treat your chulin seriously, right? But we're careful about chulin anyway. But it's only chulin. It's unsacred meat, unsacred bread, or whatever it is. It's not sacred. Then you don't need kavana. But if you want maser, which is a level up, maser sheni, then you have to have intent. Okay. Now next question is going to be, how do we know the chulin doesn't need intent? Okay. And that's going to be the question the Gemara is going to ask in tomorrow's daf. We will stop here. There's our intro. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming. Again, these laws they're kind of clear cut. They fit into a box. You just have to kind of remember them and go over them from time to time, and it will get easier. Okay. Have a Shavua Tov, everyone.